Okay, good morning. I'm Rich Thompson. I'm lucky enough to have inherited the old Morris Point property. I believe we're standing just about on where the original Morris Point house was that was built by Chester Morris's father quite a while ago. And then it went to the Condon family, and then my great aunt bought it right after the '38 hurricane and had that house dismantled. And this house right over here, the part that looks like a barn, was the servants' quarters and the garage for the Morris Point house. Now this area right here is where what was turned into patches that was given to the Mobilnicki family was a tool shed that came out of the side of Barnacle, well now it's called Barnacle, but of the servants' quarters and stuff. In the front corner was the restroom that had access from the outside too. It was basically this, the servants lived up above and the down below was a garage. Since then it's had two additions on it. The first, there was a garage put on, and then that garage was turned into a bedroom and another garage was put on. And then the front porch was enclosed to provide that. Just a little history of it. It was built originally, the Morris Point house and the Barnacle was built by William Morris, Chester Morris's father, in 1917. And in 1925 it was sold to the Condons family, which put electric lights in it and more plumbing and stuff. The original house the water was taken from a well over there that had a windmill that pumped it up to a cistern on the third floor. And when the Condon family owned it, my mother and her two friends, they would float their boats up in the cistern and stuff like that. They would play up there. In 1933 it was sold to Charles Downey, and he recreated, made it into the Morris Point Hotel. And then he had it until the '38, and after the '38 is when my great aunt bought it and had the house dismantled that was destroyed and turned the servants' quarters and the garage into what it is today, the Barnacle. And part of the structure on the backside, which I just talked about earlier, was a tool shed that was given to the Mobilnicki family that was turned into patches, which is now just a tool shed off of their redesigned house, Bittersweet. Chester Blackie Morris, which was the son of the original builder, he was an actor, as his father was in productions too. And he was most famous for his movies as Blackie, Boston Blackie. He did 60 films doing that. And after that he went on to stage work, and he died at age 69.
Welcome to the Barnacle and to Patches. It is a great story. I had a private tour the other day, and I thought I knew about this place, and I really didn't. So it was
the second best kept secret in Quine.
I thought what I'd do is first, because not all of you know Rich and Peter, so I thought I'd let you know what their connection is in their families to being here. We're going to stay here first, and we're going to take a walk around Barnacle. So Rich will speak first, and then after that we will go to Patches. But it's all connected, so it'll be interesting for you, I'm sure.
Yes, they have roots with each other. Yes.
Yeah. Rich is very rooted in Quaney, his whole family. As you say, you were born here?
No, I wasn't born
No,
here. I
know.
said that my children were conceived on a vacation down here. They were both born in April. So it doesn't take too much math to figure it out.
Rich's mother, I think you knew Joanne Thompson, And Joanne's, see if I can get this all straight.
Oh, I'll correct you
Yeah,
if you're
I'm
wrong.
sure you will. Joanne's aunt, or she had quite a few aunts.
She had three aunts and one mother.
And they all owned different places in Quaney. So is it Lila?
Lila.
Lila was the one that ended up buying Morris Point, which was located right out here in front of us here. But she bought it. Morris Point started as a private home. People from the Morris family from New York.
William
Bill-
Morris was the
William
father.
Morris. Okay,
Yep.
you can kind of repeat what I've said because you know more than I do. They built Morris Point, and there's a picture of it out there. Do you all know what Morris Point looked like? Okay. So the Morris family built it first. Then they sold it to another family, the Congdon family. And the Congdons were friends of your
My mother and Janet Condon and Peggy Race were childhood friends down in this area.
Yeah, they were really tight-knit.
Yes, they were.
Yes, yeah. So then that was sold to
Charlie Downey.
Downey, and it became a hotel.
Up for
All right, and then the hurricane hit, and the rest is history.
great grandmother.
Right.
She passed away in the '38 trying to escape the wave from Cedar Haven, which is where Steve Pete's smaller house was on that lot. The house survived, but I've learned just a few years ago that basically her and her nurse were trying to go up, which is now Surfside, and the wave washed them out to sea.
Yeah. I gave you that
Yeah.
account, yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, Leah Bradshaw told me that one of her relatives witnessed that happening back in the '38. We do go back a little ways. It was originally, my mother never really thought it was worth ever putting much into the house because she knew that if for any reason we ever have to sell it, the first thing that would happen is it wouldn't be here. And that's one of the reasons why we've tried to keep it as long, and hopefully we'll be able to keep it as long as we can.
And it's great the way that it's kept as much as possible the way it
Right,
was.
right.
That adds to the charm.
Yes, it does.
But you could never let it be destroyed.
I don't really want to.
No.
This little hole in the wall, or I think at one time it might have been a flower holder, was something that as a family tradition every year, the kids and younger kids, we would take pictures every year of them poking their head through the little window. Now this is come and go. It was a beach house that my great aunt built. It was over along the seawall to the east side of where the Morris Point house would have been. And in the '54 hurricane, it was picked up and moved back to the house behind it. And then my great aunt moved it to this location, which is adjacent to where Barnacle is. It's a one-room beach house, no interior walls, that has a little small kitchenette and a bathroom in it and an outdoor shower, like every good beach house should have. But when I was younger and the family, we would use this as our changing house and our access to the beach. Now we just rent them out so other people can enjoy them.
My name is Peter Mogilnicki, and behind me is part of the cottage that my mother and dad built from pieces of the wreckage of the 1938 hurricane. We call it patches because it was patched together from pieces of other houses ruined by that storm. And you've already heard, perhaps, about Richard Thompson's family and how they owned property and how this building was originally attached to one of their buildings. but I'm getting ahead of myself. In any event, Richie's great aunt gave my mother and dad a shed which was attached to Barnacle Cottage that you have gotten a look at. And the caveat was that my dad could have the shed if he would move it off the property. And being a resourceful guy, he did that. And my mother and dad bought a small 50 by 80 lot from the Dowd family, Agnes and Florence Dowd. And it was 50 by 80 originally, which was a pretty small piece of property, but they put the shed on it. And my dad, who was a carpenter by profession, made first a one-room cottage, and then extended it to include bedroom, another bedroom, and a living room. Put a nice stone fireplace in it, and put an L on this cottage. And I've got some pictures of that, which you can see. So when Lila Crapo Sewell gave my mother and dad the shed, and by the way, I should say that Lila was my mother's boss at G. Fox and Company in Hartford, Connecticut. And the reason my mom and dad got to see this Quanakantog was that Lila would bring her staff down here for morale building as a retreat in the fall. And so she brought my mother and other saleswomen down here. And that's how Lila introduced my mother and dad to Quanakantog. But in any event, the original shed, when my dad moved it, was located about where those white pillars on the porch are. That's where they put it. And then there was he built the L off in this direction. So the little shed was there, and then he added on the bedroom and built an L out and put a stone fireplace in the corner. And when we decided to build this place, we by that time had purchased bits and pieces of property around, so it was a little bit bigger than 50 by 80. This was the best site for the new house for Bittersweet. And we had to make the choice of should we take Patches down entirely, or should we try to save part of it? And of course it had a lot of sentimental value. And so we decided to save part of it and move it. Well, we got a moving company from Westerly. I think it was George Werble, I think that's his name, along with Westerly family in the construction business. They moved buildings. And George came when the house was over there, when the remaining house, we had taken down the L by that time, was over there, and he looked at it and he shook his head and he said, you know, we can move it, but you could build a new property just as good for just about what's going to cost to move it. Well, of course, it was a no-brainer for us. We said, well, let's move it. So that's what we did. We put railroad ties down, we put roller skates under the house, and George helped us push it over to that new spot. And here we are now with a little original shed back more or less in its original configuration, a new location, but its original configuration in our new house, Bittersweet, where it's now seated. Is pre-1938 hurricane. This is Barnacle, Richie Thompson's current Barnacle. This was the servants' quarters and perhaps garage, perhaps barn, who knows, of the big Morris house. And this is a little shed off the back. And you can imagine if there's a window here, imagine another window here cut off. This shed was extended out to about there. This was what Lila Crapo gave to my mother and dad. They moved it onto the 50 by 80 lot. And here's the little shed. Here's that third window. Used to be covered up. And that door is right there. And this is the location of the shed after my mother and dad moved it. Then they started to fix it up and add on to it, and that became this. There's the two windows, these two windows. That's the old door. My dad made a window out of that. Put another door and entry, and this is the kitchen. This is the part that now remains that we saw, and here's the L, the living room and my folks' bedroom back behind that fireplace. So this is now the part that remains, and here's the current situation right after we built Bittersweet. There's Bittersweet. We'd moved Patches from what was left of Patches, we moved from there, put it over here. So behind me, in this corner of what's now left of Patches, is I'm pretty sure is the original one of the original walls of the original shed that was destroyed by the storm or moved around by the storm, and that Lila gave to my dad and mom. And one thing that's always interested me is this is a new 2x4 which my dad used in 1941. By that time, a 2x4 was not 2 inches by 4 inches. It was 3 inches and a half by 1 3/4 inches. But this is just bigger. So this is a real 2x4 back from the 20s or 30s, whenever this shed was originally built. Anyway, I think he kept that wall for some reason, and then added the new, put a new roof on. This is all construction that was done in the late 30s and early 40s when he converted the shed into a cottage, a real cottage. This was my bedroom, this part of it right here. Then there was a bathroom here. My folks' bedroom was in the new L, and the living room was off in that direction, and the fireplace was right at the corner of the living room and this remaining part of the kitchen. We used to have a little wood stove right there that warmed the place up on a chilly spring morning, and that was where we ate. Dining room looking out at the ocean, and the kitchen was over there. Now it's my my fishing shanty, and when we have grandchildren come to visit, they often like to camp out in here. And so, as we said, this was the back wall of the shed that's still part of what's now our current fishing shanty. And like the back wall, here's an example of the original floor. Pretty big boards, not finished in any way. That was part of the shed that was attached to Barnacle that became our house, that eventually ended up part of our new house when we took part of this one apart. So as part of our fishing hobby, these are flies that each one of these flies has been retired because it's caught at least one striped bass in the surf. And I decided that they probably deserve not to be beaten up in the surf, but given a place of honor in the house. So we took up the floor in Patches when we took down the L fairly carefully, took all the nails out, and had the flooring refinished and relaid it in here. So this is the old flooring from the original, well, not the original shed, but the part that my dad had put down in the living room of Patches. The floor here is also from Patches, but it's not flooring from Patches. What we did was we took the 2x6 rafters that made up part of the roof of the L that we took apart, and we had the rafters sliced in half and finished, so we made this flooring out of it. And you can see, if you look at it carefully, all the tracks from the old nails. They were all taken out by us, one by one, and the people that sliced them in half weren't 100% sure we got every single one, so they ran the thing through an X-ray to make sure we got all the nails before they put it through their planers. I don't think we missed many. But anyway, the black distress marks on this flooring are all the old rust marks from the old nail holes, and we think it came out pretty well. I made the bed out of the same material. That's the same material as the floor is made out of. And then we had a little bit left over, so we put together this mirror frame, which is made of the same material that the floor and the bed are made out of. I don't think there are many houses around that have matching mirror frames, flooring, and bed, but this is all from the original patches, and all was handled by my mother and dad, which is kind of nice. I only recently came across this photograph. My brother found it, but I know this is a picture of my father, and he's got a post hole digger, and he's got some foundation strings there, and I'm pretty sure he's laying out the location that the shed is going to go to, and is digging holes for the piers. Of course, the original cottage was just had no deep foundation, just was on piers. I'm pretty sure that's what he's doing. I think this is a view looking more or less to the east, and I believe that's the peak of the Mace cottage, which part of which you can still see from the window of this house, and there were no houses anywhere else, of course.
Okay.
The sink bar here in Bittersweet we made out of the whole 2x6s that were rafters. These are the ones that we split for the flooring in the bedroom, but the bar we made out of the full 2x6s. There aren't nearly as many nail holes in this as there were in the floor, because it's the whole 2x6 instead of just the sliced 2x6.
Right.
So this is our best effort to kind of reconstruct the mood of the original patches. We used some of that same beadboard that the walls and ceiling were made out of in patches that we took apart. This was all part of the L, and we used that as paneling for this study up here in Bittersweet. We can sit here and look out the window and remember patches and think great thoughts.
Welcome to Morris Point. We've been neighbors since as long as I've been alive.
Right. And I think I sort of remember when you were born.
Oh God.
Yeah. We were, what, how many years apart? I'm 76.
I'm 58.
So that's
roughly
yeah, you're
20
years apart.
Over 20 years
Yeah.
apart.
I don't feel 20 years old.
Well, you were starting to say that I've been here my whole life, basically. In the summers, I used to come down, and my mother's best friend, Peggy Race, and they had two guys, and Jerry Race is to this day probably my best friend too. That we would spend the summers together.
And you would probably come down because your grandmother lived year-round down here, I think, didn't she?
My grandmother did at that time. Yep.
So no doubt you would visit her sometimes, Thanksgiving or Christmas or winters.
Actually, my great aunt and my grandmother would come up to West Hartford for Thanksgiving, anyways.
Uh-huh.
But during the summer, before my great aunt and uncle retired down here in the 60s, which was not long after we used to stay in my grandmother's house for the summer. She had a
the one where she had the canaries and the
she had canaries and raised corgi dogs too.
Yeah. So you would stay with her for the summer?
Yeah, she had literally the garage was like a small apartment off.
I didn't
the
realize
house.
that. I didn't realize you stayed with
until, like I
Gladys
said,
Best.
Gladys Best was my grandmother.
Yeah.
And when Aunt Lucille and Uncle Stanley built their retirement house and retired down here, then we took over what they had, a 2-car garage with a summer apartment over it, and then we started staying there.
And that's
And the house that I live in now.
Yeah.
That,
And have expanded. And
luckily for me, my mother was the only offspring of all 4 of the Crapo sisters, so it all trickled down to her.
that's trickle down economics.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. Good enough.
Okay. The house that Come and Go ended up in the '54 hurricane was Ted Glasson's house, and that came to be because my great aunt, who had a cottage there, really liked Ted's in-laws and Ted, and actually a few days before she passed away in the winter, she literally had Ted come down and made him a deal he couldn't refuse to buy that house because she wanted him to have that house. And to this day, Ted is still with us, and now that he's sold that house, when he can, comes down and rents Barnacle, which brings to mind another interesting story. Is we've had to accommodate him specifically because in World War II he was a Navy officer, and he ended up having to bring the ship back from over in Asia or something, or over there, and because the captain took ill, and he followed a star back. So whenever he's up in Barnacle, he has us turn the bed around, so when he wakes up at night, he can see that star, because that star just means so much to him, because it got them safely back.
It's a beautiful story.